On the darkest nights of World War II, the sky wasn't silent. It was hunted. While the world slept, a secret war raged above the clouds, fought by airmen who could barely see their own wings, yet were expected to find the enemy in a pitch-black sky. This is the story the history books barely mention, the secret birth of the world's first night fighters. When World War II erupted, nighttime became the ultimate weapon. Nations believed darkness would protect their bombers, a black curtain that made aircraft almost impossible to track or intercept. Cities burned under moonlit raids, airfields vanished in firestorms, and fighter pilots could do nothing. In those early months, the night sky belonged to whoever was willing to strike from the shadows. There were no defenses, no warning, just fear, fire, and silence. But in hidden rooms across Europe and the Pacific, behind locked doors and classified maps, military scientists and commanders met under dim lamps, studying a question that felt almost impossible. How do you fight an enemy you can't see? Fighter pilots tried everything: moonlight chasing, guesswork, flying blind toward explosions in the distance. But at night, the sky swallowed everything. Fighter pilots weren't hunters, they were victims. Bombers slipped through defenses with ease, disappearing into the darkness long before any fighter could react. That's when Allied and Axis powers made a radical decision. If the darkness cannot be defeated, then someone must learn to operate inside it. Small, secret units were formed, unofficial squadrons operating outside normal command structures. They tested modified aircraft, strange antenna systems, early infrared scopes, and experimental targeting gear that often failed mid-flight. Many missions never made it into official logs, and many pilots never made it home. But these early failures formed the foundation for something extraordinary. Deep inside labs filled with glowing vacuum tubes, engineers began exploring a technology that military leaders barely understood: airborne radar, a device that could see what human eyes couldn't. If radar could be mounted inside a plane, if it could detect bombers in real time, then for the first time in history, night would no longer belong to the enemy. The first prototypes were complicated, full of flickering green lines, static interference, and ghost signals. Pilots couldn't use them alone. So a new kind of warrior emerged: the radar operator. Usually young, often barely trained, they became the eyes of the aircraft. Inside a cramped fuselage, staring into a glowing scope, they guided pilots through total darkness, adjusting dials, reading blips, whispering distances, and giving the words that meant life or death. Target locked, move in. With radar came purpose-built night fighters: the American P-61 Black Widow, the British Mosquito, the German Ju-88 Night Interceptor. Sleek, dark, heavily armed, these machines were engineered not for speed or elegance, but for the kill. Twin-engine power, nose-mounted cannons, reinforced armor, everything designed to strike an enemy who never knew they were being hunted.
When the war entered its darkest phase, one truth became undeniable: human eyes were no match for the night. Pilots could be the bravest men alive, but bravery meant nothing when they were blind at 10,000 feet. Bombers slipped through the darkness like ghosts, and fighters scrambled toward shadows that vanished before they could even close in. Both sides were losing aircraft not to enemy fire, but to the night itself. And that was when a radical idea began to take shape. If pilots could not see the enemy, then the aircraft itself would have to see for them. This was the beginning of airborne radar. In secret laboratories across Britain, the United States, and Germany, engineers worked under dim lights, surrounded by wires, vacuum tubes, and glowing screens. The first airborne radar units were unstable, bulky, and unreliable. They overheated, they flickered, they produced ghost signals that disappeared the moment a pilot tried to chase them. But when the system worked, even for a moment, it changed everything. For the first time in history, a pilot and his crew could detect an enemy aircraft miles away in total darkness. Not as a clear picture, but as a trembling green blip on a circular screen, a faint pulse in the void. It was the birth of the night hunt. With the breakthrough came the need for special squadrons. The Allies formed small, classified units that tested radar at night, flying missions that were never entered into official logs. These crews took off with no radio chatter and no support. They were pioneers in the most dangerous sense of the word, testing unproven technology in pitch-black skies, chasing enemies they could not see. Many of these missions ended in silence, but every crew that returned brought home valuable knowledge: how radar behaved in storms, how altitude affected signals, how ground interference distorted the screen, and how pilot and radar operator had to think and act as a single mind. As radar improved, a new kind of airman appeared, the airborne radar operator. While the pilot focused on flying blind, the operator sat deeper in the aircraft, staring into a glowing green scope. Every flicker, every pulse, every shifting dot had a meaning. The operator became the new eyes of the airplane. If he misread the screen, the fighter might overshoot the target or collide with it. If he read it correctly, he could guide the pilot to within a few dozen yards of an enemy bomber without ever being detected. In the night war, the operator wasn't a secondary role. He was the hunter.
Scope check complete. Wait,
Once
I have a
commanders
contact.
realized
Bearing
radar worked,
090,
they
moving
stopped
fast.
modifying old planes and began designing aircraft built
Vector
specifically
049er.
for the night fight. This
Confirm
gave
visual, I
birth to the
repeat,
first
confirm visual,
true
over.
night fighters. The American P-61
Scope check
Black
complete.
Widow,
Wait, I
the
have a
British
contact.
Mosquito night
Bearing
fighter,
090,
the German
moving fast.
UU-88 interceptors. These machines were created
Vector
not for
049er.
elegance, but for dominance.
Confirm visual, I repeat,
Twin
confirm
engines for
visual,
power,
over.
heavy cannons mounted under the nose or belly, dark paint schemes that blended into the night. They weren't just fighters, they were predators built to strike from the shadows. And as they took to the skies, the balance of power in the darkness began to shift. But the war in the night was far from over. The enemy learned to adapt, flying lower, hiding in weather, and developing new tactics to evade radar. What followed was a deadly contest between technology, skill, and pure nerve. A chess match played in total darkness, where every move meant life or death.
The arrival of true night fighters changed everything, but the night war was still a brutal contest. Technology alone wasn't enough. To survive, pilots and radar operators had to invent entirely new tactics, new instincts, and new ways to think in the dark. The first real night hunts began with silence. No formations, no radio chatter, no moonlight. Only the hum of engines and the soft glow of radar screens. Crews would climb into the sky until the world below vanished into blackness. The cockpit lights were dimmed. The air was cold and still. The night fighter became a shadow drifting through a larger shadow. The operator watched the radar screen, searching for the faintest sign of life. A single blip at 10 miles, then 8, then 6. The pilot adjusted course based only on the operator's voice. Left 2 degrees. Climb 100 feet. Reduce speed. They approached their target like hunters stalking prey in complete darkness. The enemy bombers had no idea anyone was behind them. Most flew straight and level, believing the night protected them. That belief was about to end. As the night fighter closed in, the blip on the radar screen grew stronger. The operator called out distance markers: 4 miles, 3 miles, 2. At 1 mile, the pilot strained his eyes, searching through the darkness for any hint of movement. Sometimes, all he could see was a faint silhouette against a slightly brighter patch of sky. Sometimes he saw only the glowing exhaust of enemy engines. He eased the throttle and positioned the fighter just below and behind the target. This was the safest place. Most bombers had no gunners who could see directly beneath them. The night fighter sat in the blind spot, invisible. Then came the most dangerous moment of all, the climb into firing position. The pilot slowly pulled back on the stick, raising the nose by only a few degrees at a time. 50 yards, 40, 30. The bomber still had no idea it was being hunted. Then the pilot pressed the trigger. A burst of cannon fire erupted from the night fighter, ripping into the bomber's wings and fuselage. Explosions flashed across the sky as fuel tanks ignited. The bomber fell away in flames, plunging into the darkness below. The night fighter rolled out, diving to avoid debris and searching for another target. These first night hunts were terrifying. Radar was unreliable. Gunners fired blindly. Weather could turn deadly in seconds. Many night fighters were lost not to enemy action, but to storms, fog, and the disorienting effect of flying with no horizon. Pilots described the feeling as drowning in the sky, unable to tell up from down. But the ones who succeeded became legends. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers. Their missions were often classified, yet they protected cities, airfields, and entire invasion forces by stopping night raids before they reached their targets. In the Pacific, these hunts became even more critical. Japanese bombers and Zero fighters carried out relentless night attacks on Allied bases. The night fighters had to intercept them in complete blackness over vast stretches of ocean, often with no visual references at all. Radar operators guided their pilots through darkness, turbulence, and radio silence. A single mistake could send the aircraft into the water. A single miscalculation could put them directly into enemy fire. And yet, night after night, they launched anyway. They chased bombers through cloud layers, dodged anti-aircraft fire from friendly ships, and tracked targets so low that radar signals bounced off the ocean's surface. By the middle of the war, the night fighters were no longer experimental. They were essential. Enemy crews learned to fear the green glow of radar. They knew that somewhere out there, in the darkness behind them, a silent hunter was closing in. What had once been a war of shadows was becoming a war of precision. But the true evolution of night combat was still ahead, because soon both sides would develop new weapons, new tactics, and new technologies that would forever change how the night war was fought. And some of those breakthroughs would become so secret, so advanced, that they remained classified long after the war ended.
As the night war intensified, the technology driving it evolved at a breathtaking pace. What began as flickering experimental radar soon became the cornerstone of a new kind of warfare, one fought in silence, in shadows, and far from the public eye. The enemy adapted. Bombers flew lower to evade detection. Fighters changed their routes, weaving through mountain ranges and cloud layers to avoid radar beams. Some aircraft carried strips of metal foil, hoping to confuse radar screens with false echoes. But the night fighters adapted faster. New radar models extended their range. Ground controllers learned to guide night fighters from miles away, directing them like chess pieces toward incoming raids. Aircraft received improved engines, better visibility instruments, heated cockpits, and more powerful cannons. Most importantly, the coordination between pilot and radar operator became almost instinctive. They trained until they could anticipate each other's thoughts. The operator watched the green screen. The pilot held the controls steady. Two minds working in perfect synchronization, moving through pitch darkness as if it were daylight. This new level of mastery led to missions that few people ever heard about, missions that remained hidden in classified archives for decades.
These operations were known simply as black missions. They involved prototype radar systems, clandestine night interceptions, and flights so dangerous that even their existence was denied in official records. Night fighters were dispatched to hunt high-value targets that conventional aircraft could not reach. Some flew behind enemy lines without lights, radios, or escorts. Others tested new technologies mid-flight, unsure if the systems would overload or fail entirely. For the men on these missions, fear was not unusual. It was ever present. The night was unpredictable. Clouds could blind the radar. Winds could tear a plane off course. A single wrong move, a minor mechanical failure, and the ocean below became a black void waiting to swallow them. But the hunters in the dark pressed on. The stakes were too high. Every bomber intercepted meant hundreds of lives saved on the ground. Every night raid prevented meant one more city spared from devastation. And so the night fighters continued their relentless work, night after night, mission after mission, until the balance of power shifted permanently. Enemy crews began to fear the unseen presence behind them. They knew that if radar found them, escape was almost impossible. As the war neared its end, radar technology became even more advanced. New detection systems could differentiate between aircraft types. Some could track altitude changes instantly. Others could identify formations and allow night fighters to select their targets before they were even visible. Night combat had evolved from guesswork into a precise science, a science forged in danger, perfected through loss, and mastered by those who willingly stepped into the unknown. When the war finally ended, the world celebrated daylight victories, massive armies, dramatic invasions, iconic battles captured by newsreel cameras. But the night fighters remained largely invisible, just as they had been during the war. No victory parades, no headlines, no fame. Their missions were sealed in classified reports, locked away in steel cabinets, dusted over, forgotten. Many of the pilots and radar operators returned home without ever speaking about what they had done. Families never knew how many lives their sons had saved, how many bombers they had intercepted, or how close they had come to never returning. Yet their contributions were enormous. They were the shield that guarded sleeping cities. They were the reason countless soldiers survived long enough to fight another day. They were the pioneers who transformed darkness from a weapon of terror into a battlefield that could be understood, controlled, and ultimately mastered. The night belonged to no one, until these men claimed it. Today, decades later, their legacy is finally emerging from the shadows. Restored archives, declassified documents, and surviving veterans reveal the truth that the war in the dark was every bit as decisive, as dangerous, and as heroic as the battles fought in daylight. And now their story belongs to all of us. They fought in silence so the world could wake to peace. Their courage shaped the course of history, and their mastery of the night redefined what modern warfare would become. The next time you hear about World War II, remember this. Victory wasn't won only on beaches, in trenches, or under the sun. It was also won in the places no camera captured, in the black, empty skies, where a handful of pilots and their radar operators faced the unknown. The war in the dark was real, and the men who fought it deserve to be remembered.